Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Jeff Wenninger. Last name is spelled Wenninger. And he's just published a new book. Check it out. If you're watching this on Rumble, X, or Rockvin, you will see the cover. It's On Thin Ice, an LAPD veteran's journey to reimagine policing. And I scanned through it just today, and it has a lot of interesting details. I'm in LA, so a lot of the sites were very familiar to me. A lot of the events as a Californian were familiar to me. Rodney King, some of these names, Tom Bradley, who was the mayor, Bratton, reforms, police concerns. There's a lot of those things covered in this book. Also, his personal experiences. He probably has a few policing stories to share if you'd like to. But he has over 30 years of frontline law enforcement experience, and he rose through the ranks of the LAPD to become a respected lieutenant. He's renowned for his leadership in critical situations and has a commitment to accountability. He was also as the founder and CEO of Law Enforcement Consultants LLC. He's a sought after expert witness, consultant, and speaker. He works alongside law enforcement agencies, legal professionals, and policymakers to reimagine policing for a modern world. His work focuses on fostering trust, raising professional standards, and advancing public safety through actionable, community-centered solutions. But again, we're going to talk about his new book. Full title again is On Thin Ice, an LAPD veteran's journey to reimagine policing. And it's Jeff Wenninger. So Jeff, welcome to the show.
No, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So for people who haven't heard your name, maybe heard your background, maybe you can talk a little bit. You have a very long, decades-long history in law enforcement. Maybe you can talk about how you got into law enforcement and how, when your career ended, and what led to the writing of this book, On Thin Ice.
Certainly. Well, I'd like to begin actually with first day on this earth, because my upbringing plays a large part in the reader's understanding of my perspective and how I saw my law enforcement career when it comes to the actual solutions that I suggest in the book. So I was born to a teenage mother, and she put me up for adoption. And I lived for a short period of time in a foster home, and then I was adopted. And my father was a sociology professor and administrator at Kent State University here in Ohio. And my mother was a chemist for DuPont. They were both highly educated. And it was their desire to have 4 children, each 1 year apart. And they were married for 12 years and weren't having any luck. So that's why they looked into adoption. And as life often has it, about the time that they were approved for adoption, lo and behold, my mother becomes pregnant, and they have my sister, Holly. So they still had the same goal of having 4 children, each 1 year apart. So they went ahead and went through with the adoption, and they adopted me. And then they adopted my brother, and he's Japanese. And then I have a foster sister who they fostered, who's Black. And I grew up in the 60s and 70s in the Midwest here in Kent, Ohio, in the university town of Kent, Ohio. And it was through those experiences that I formulated my views on race and societal issues, very much at the prompting of my father. And growing up in Kent, I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with May 4th, 1970, 4 dead in Ohio. And that's when the National Guardsmen shot and killed 4 students and injured 13 others. And I remember those days because we had to pick my father up from the university campus because there was a curfew set and everything. And I was quite young, but it was a very memorable vision, seeing all the National Guardsmen in their uniforms and their military gear. But that was something that perpetuated throughout my entire youth. And I would talk to my father oftentimes about the culpability associated with that incident. And my father, very much without me knowing it, refined my critical thinking skills and to look at the global picture of things and to be able to come up with a conclusion based on evidence and be able to articulate your rationale for your belief or your conclusion. So it's with that that I went into my law enforcement career. Now, listen, I had no desire to be a police officer whatsoever. If you would have asked me when I was 18 years old what I was going to be doing as an adult throughout my professional life, it would not have been being a police officer. There was an incident that made me change my entire trajectory of my life. And that was when I was 20 years old. Went out on a Friday night. It was Labor Day weekend. And I went out with a hockey buddy of mine. I played Division I college ice hockey on scholarship. And we went out. And when the bar closed, everybody was being funneled out onto this narrow sidewalk, which wasn't designed to hold all the students that were there. So a number of us flowed out into the street, and my buddy thought it would be cute, I suppose, to prop himself up on the hood of a car that was full of females that were trying to get through this group. And when they didn't think that was funny, and he went off of the hood, he grabbed and snapped the antenna off of the hood. That kind of dates me a little bit, back when we had antennas on the hoods of cars. But a police officer saw that interaction, and he came down, grabbed my buddy, handcuffed him, and put him in the back of his police car. So I had the intention of finding, well, where are they going to take him? How long is it going to take for them to process him? And was it going to cost to get him out of jail? And when I approached the police officer, he was very belligerent and made it very perfectly clear that if I didn't get back up on the sidewalk, I was going to jail as well. So I had a few beers, but I had my bearings about me. And I got back up on the sidewalk, and it wasn't long before 2 more units showed up. And those 2 individuals, at the direction of the initial officer, confronted me. And initially I felt, oh, okay, there's a little bit of pause. There was one of them was a sergeant. I thought that individual would bring some calm and some reasonable thought process to this entire incident. And he confronted me with, more belligerent, conduct. And before I knew it, I was being physically assaulted and beaten. And I was in the backseat of a police car, handcuffed, heading down to the jail. And when I get down there, I find out they're going to book me for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and interfering in official business. And I asked where my buddy was, and they said, well, we released him. And I mean, I was like, the ridiculousness of it was really just started to set in. And so I sat in jail that entire weekend, and I was released on my own recognizance on the Tuesday morning when I went to court. And I refused to take any of the deals that they tried to offer me. And I took it all the way to a jury trial. And when I did that, before the jury trial started, they said, if you sign this ticket, which was a $60 fine, they would drop all the charges. And with that, I agreed. And that's how the case was dispositioned. And to make it even stranger, about 1.5 years later, I saw in the newspaper that they were taking applicants for correction officers in this city jail. And partly out of humor, I applied. Lo and behold, I was hired. The complete total exoneration of any wrongdoing. What turned out to be a very transformative, critical incident in my life was something so minor that they felt that it was appropriate to hire me to work in the jails in which I actually had been detained in for a long weekend. So that is how my law enforcement career began. And my intention was to follow my father into academia and be a professor of criminal justice, as he was a professor of sociology. And prior to starting my doctorate program, he encouraged me to get 5 years of law enforcement experience at a large law enforcement agency. And we're better to do that than Los Angeles. And that's how I ended up out in Los Angeles, with no intention of doing a total of 33 years and 4 months that I did in law enforcement. But that's how it worked out.
Right. So you were kind of a lateral too. So you went through, got your start in corrections or in jails, and saw the inside and the mechanics of jails, which isn't pretty, to lateral hire into LAPD itself, right?
Well, I initially I was hired by LAPD as well as the LA sheriffs. And there was a few incidents that occurred that made me make the decision to go with the sheriffs initially. And, and I'll share those with you. When I was going through the background process with LAPD, I was down at police headquarters, and a sergeant who headed up the division that conducts the backgrounds for the LAPD pulled me aside and he said, "I see that you've been hired by the LA County Sheriff's Department." And I said, "Yes, sir, I have." And he goes, "You're a fool if you don't take that job. We used to be better, but no longer." Now, prior to that occurring, when I was going through the process with the LA County Sheriff's Department, I was doing the physical fitness testing, and I met another candidate, and he was there testing, and his father was a retired sergeant from the LAPD. And he told me, my father wouldn't even allow me to apply with the LAPD. And I said, "Why?" And he goes, "Why don't you come on over and have a beer with my father? He can explain it to you." And I thought, who better to hear it from than the person himself? So I did do that. And he spoke very disparagingly about the LAPD. So as a result of those two incidents, it made me think perhaps the LAPD is not the place to go. But that is where I actually really wanted to go. Listen, when I was in college, you probably remember the movie Colors with
Sure.
Robert Duvall and Sean Penn.
Yeah.
That movie, I just loved that movie. And I wanted to be LAPD. I wanted to experience that. But it was a result of those two incidents that I just explained that caused me to go with the sheriff's department.
And what's the difference? I mean, for people who aren't familiar with kind of that law enforcement environment, what's the difference between the LAPD always has had a reputation, sometimes not the best. Is there really a significant difference, like you say, between LAPD and the sheriffs?
Well, LAPD polices the LA proper, and the responsibilities of the sheriff's department are more expansive than just patrolling the streets of the county. They're responsible for the custody, the jails within the county, as well as the courts. So over half of their sworn personnel either work in custody or their courts, not in patrol functions.
I see. I didn't know that. So all those guys who are helping the people in jail, in and out of courts, managing courts, are sheriffs. I see. I never knew that distinction. So, but you did go from jail to sheriff, like you were on patrol, and you kind of moved around, didn't you? Like I thought that's what I got from.
Well, the sheriff's department, when I went there, I was initially assigned to the inmate reception center. I was quite a runner at the time, and there's a huge law enforcement race every year. It's called Baker to Vegas. It's from Baker, California to Las Vegas. It's a 120-mile run, and you have a 20-member team where you have a relay, and it's a huge thing to win that and have bragging rights. So the LA County Sheriff's strongest running team was out of Men's Central Jail, and the Inmate Reception Center was part of Men's Central Jail. So out of the academy, I was assigned to the Inmate Reception Center, and primarily because of my running ability. And I ran there. I think we won three times, setting course records all three times that I ran.
And that's the big, tall. Is that the one right in downtown, or is that the bigger jail that's kind of closer to Chinatown? I don't know which one that is.
Men's Central Jails is right there at Boucher Street and Mission. It's at the time I worked there, it wasn't that tall. It's now a tower.
Okay.
That wasn't built when I worked there.
I understand. I know exactly where that is. So you're right in the heart of downtown.
Yeah, just outside of downtown.
Where you started. You were in LA for some very important events, very important people who are in the news all over the place. Like when I was reading Daryl Gates, I didn't know the name Robert Vernon, but some interesting characters and interesting events, Rodney King too, and Ramparts. Maybe you can talk some of those. I know you've had some pretty intense experiences as well. Maybe you can share some of those.
Well, the first experience that was just one that I haven't experienced since to that extent would be the riots, the Rodney King riots. And I was a deputy sheriff at the time. And when the verdicts were read, I was in Glendale having dinner and at a Tony Roma's. And we didn't have cell phones back then. We didn't have pagers. I was just watching the news, and Reginald Denny was being beaten at Florence and Normandy. He was pulled out of his semi truck, and he was being beaten and had a brick smashed across his head. And we were notified via the news to report to our areas of assignment. And that's what I did. And I was sent out to Firestone Station. And to give your listeners some context to that, that is LA County Sheriff's Station that is just east of 77th Division. They actually border the geographic borders, the east border of 77th and the west border of Firestone. They meet up, and the riots broke out in 77th Division at Florence and Normandy. So I was right there in the flashpoint of
South Central, right? That's what they call it. Yeah.
South Central. They drop the South Central aspect if they just call it South LA.
Gotcha.
But so yeah, it was eye opening. I was still green. Primarily, like I said, I grew up in Kent, Ohio. It's a town of about 26,000 people. I left home when I was 16. I played junior hockey in Canada and in a town of about 7,000. I played in the United States Hockey League in Dubuque, Iowa, which was about 62,000. That was the largest place I'd ever lived as far as the size of the population. So living in Los Angeles was quite a transformation for me. And then seeing it in that environment where everything had combusted. I mean, it was absolute anarchy. It was hard to explain. The one thing I remember, I'll never forget, because we were bussed down in the LA County Sheriff's buses, and we're all dressed in our riot gear. And we're driving by these strip malls, and people are walking out of the broken windows with electronics and arms full of clothing and televisions and things. It didn't even flinch at our presence. It was just such a sign of how badly the relationship had deteriorated between the police and the communities they serve. And having come from the Midwest in Ohio, it was something very difficult for me to understand, because we actually respect people in uniform where I grew up. And when you were spoken to, you listened and you abided by what you were told to do. Even if you didn't believe that it was the right thing to do, you did it anyway. But, that was not the case in what I was seeing.
So Rodney King was almost kind of like a match that lit an already pre-existing kindling, right? Something people were already angry, perceived grievances against law enforcement in LA. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a powder keg. It was a powder keg ready to blow. And to be honest with you, I share in my book some experiences that I had immediately following the riots that showed nothing actually even changed. And I'll share one with you. It was probably within a year of the riots, and I'm working 77th Division now as a policeman in patrol. And I was assigned to this officer as partners, because our regular partners both were on a day off. So we were partnered up for this one day. It was a one-off type of day. And we were driving down the street, and he was driving and I was the passenger. And we saw a male white with a female black, and they were walking hand in hand. And he says to me, he goes, "My parents taught me better than that." And I go, what exactly do you mean by that? And he says, "My parents taught me not to have sex with animals." And, listen, the reality is people's beliefs and attitudes influence their decisions and actions. And I just found it shocking with the riots having just occurred within a year, that you had an officer that was policing these communities that had combusted just a year prior because of this type of mentality of the law enforcement officer. And it was still quite prevalent. Nothing had changed as a result. And, it's even the studies that were done and the recommendations that came out as a result of the the riots didn't address the systemic issues between the law enforcement agencies and the communities that they serve.
Wasn't it called the Webster Commission? Didn't Webster
Yeah,
show up? Yeah.
the Webster Commission. There have been so many commissions. Listen, LAPD over a long period of time had all the opportunity in the world to fix its problems. They had been identified by a number of different commissions, whether it's a Christopher Commission, a Webster Commission, or what have you. They just never addressed things and made the improvements that were necessary. And then ultimately, that's what resulted in the huge Rampart scandal. And, I could talk about that.
Yeah, please do. Some people don't know this story. It's a huge scandal. Ramparts, for people who don't know, to my understanding, is an area that's northwest of downtown LA. And it used to be kind of sketchy. It's lower middle class, maybe fair. I don't know if it's still the same way, but back then in the late 90s, it was. I think so.
Yeah. Listen, Rampart, when I worked 77th Division in patrol in the early 90s, Rampart and 77th Division always competed to be the homicide capital of the city every year. Maybe it wasn't unusual to have over 140 homicides in a 7 square mile division.
That was was it still the crack era? Was that still crack cocaine era? Was it 90s or 80s?
Yeah. Okay. MacArthur Park.
Ricky, Freeway Ricky.
Yeah.
South LA, I guess.
Yeah. MacArthur Park is just a drug haven. Okay. Very, 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 very riddled with crack cocaine, heroin, all that sort of stuff. And all of that was being driven by the gangs and all the money that was associated with the drug sales. But at the time, in the late 90s, I was working Metropolitan Division. And for your listeners, Metropolitan Division, the best way to describe that is it's the special forces of the LAPD. It's the SWAT, the K9. I was assigned to A platoon, which was a field platoon, and we would work crime suppression when we had violent crime spikes. We were responsible for all demonstrations. We did stakeouts, high-risk warrants. We did dignitary protection. So anytime the president, vice president, first lady, or any head of state came to the city of Los Angeles, we would work with the Secret Service or the State Department in the security details to protect those VIPs. So it's the most heavily trained tactical entity in the LAPD. And I was working there. At the time, the DOJ was investigating the department. And this was when Rafael Perez, he was a police officer, and he was assigned to Rampart Division, and he worked Crash, which is the gang unit. And it was determined that he had been stealing pounds of cocaine out of evidence lockup and selling them on the street through a girlfriend for personal profit and gain. And also during that time, there was a bank robbery that occurred that turned out involved the LAPD officer. And then it turned out that all of these officer-involved shootings were bad shootings, and that guns had been planted. There were over 106 cases that were overturned, and people were released from prison as a result. It's the most egregious type of police corruption that you could ever imagine was occurring in the LAPD. So as a result of that, we went under a consent decree, a federal consent decree imposed on us by the Department of Justice. And listen, you have to agree to go into a consent decree, which the city did to avoid, other problems. And we needed to have a consent decree because there were some systemic problems that led to the types of corruption that I'm talking about was occurring to even have the opportunity to occur. So in my estimation, how I best describe a consent decree is a blueprint for management best practices for law enforcement to ensure the highest probability of constitutional policing. And that's essentially what occurred. It took us 10 years to get out from under it.
Wow.
But I promoted to sergeant out of Metropolitan Division. And when you promote to sergeant, you get to put in a wish list. You put in 3 divisions that you'd like to be assigned to. Rampart was not one of them. I didn't want to touch that place. Well, I was handpicked to go there. Wow. They were putting together a management team that was going to clean it all up. And I was identified and selected to go there. And I was working with an unbelievable team of individuals. And I then was ultimately selected after the crash unit was disbanded because of the Rampart scandal. It was disbanded, and then they created the gang enforcement detail to replace it. And it had a different hierarchy of structure for accountability. You worked directly for the area captain, and you had a lot more checks and balances. I was selected as the officer in charge of the gang enforcement detail following the scandal to help clean things up. So I changed the entire culture of how we operated as a gang unit. And listen, it was all about, I've always said it's about selecting your personnel. The best ideas and the things that we implemented weren't from me. It was from my unbelievably talented and skilled officers that I was able to handpick for the unit. And they had unbelievable tactical skills, but even more importantly, they had the strongest tool, which was the gray matter between their ears. They understood their job. They understood the importance of the integrity of their actions in trying to bridge this breakdown of trust that the community had in law enforcement, and specifically the gang unit. And we changed our entire paradigm in which we looked at our measures of effectiveness. And I'll give you an example. Prior to us, coming in and changing things, the crash unit, they were all driven by numbers. How many felony arrests are you making, and all of that? Listen, that's really kind of mildly interesting, because if those arrests aren't being filed and you're not getting convictions, and if they're not of the people that are the shot callers, the people that really are impacting the violent crime on the streets, it's wasted time. So I actually changed my measures of effectiveness of my officers. I didn't look at their arrest rates. I looked at their filing rates. How many of their cases were being filed? When they were how many convictions were they getting? How many years of sentences were they getting? That sort of thing. And I required my officers to know the law inside and out. They had to know what authorized them to take the actions from a legal standpoint in the field in making their arrests or using their force. So I actually asked them to cite the case law that substantiated the actions that they took in their arrest reports. In their arrest reports, I stayed until everybody was done every night, and I would read every arrest report, and I would initial the bottom right corner of each page. And that was required to bring the level of accountability up, and we were recognized for that. We were very effective. We became the model gang unit to be emulated throughout the city. We were recognized with the meritorious unit citation for our effectiveness in the reduction of gang crime, and it was quite an experience.
Who's the police chief at the time when you were under Ramparts?
It was William Bratton.
So it was Bratton. Okay.
Yep, and the captain was Charlie Beck, who then became Bratton's successor as chief.
Okay, I remember these names, yeah. And Ramparts is the street. It got its name from a street that I think runs from MacArthur Park, kind of north to Silver Lake, is the Ramparts area.
Yeah, it's a north-south. Basically, Rampart area is the 110 freeway.
Yeah.
To I guess it'd be Sunset on the north, and it goes down to I don't know what
6th, 8th. I don't know.
It goes further south than that. It's down. Yeah, it goes further south than
It
that. It's
goes
down around Pico.
Pico, gotcha. So it's good size. It's a good size spot.
Mhm.
Um, when you say systemic things that allowed the Rampart situation to happen, can you elaborate on that? I mean, you reformed the policing there, but what led up to Perez and some of these other, things happening in Ramparts that needed to be changed?
Well, effective supervision has to ask the tough questions. You may have the officers that are being unbelievably productive, but then you have to ask how and why, comparatively speaking, to their peers. How is it that you're accomplishing this when the average is this, as far as so you have to look into that stuff, and you can't turn a blind eye to things. Um,
So, do you think that the person overseeing Perez was kind of negligent in their duties, and not monitoring, or was he part of the? Were they the kind of leadership? Were they part of the shortcomings of that of the
you know, I
Rampart?
I wouldn't point my finger at any one person. It was the organizational culture where it was the sergeant overseeing the unit. It was the captain of the division, and it was the bureau chief. It was everybody that they weren't asking the questions. They weren't holding people accountable, and you have to have the oversight. That's really what the consent decree brought us. Consent decree really focused on really three major things. It was the operation of specialized units and the oversight that's required, um, handling of informants, and the investigation and adjudication of force. That's primarily what it was focused on, and it had a blueprint of what had to be implemented to demonstrate that you had obtained substantial compliance in changing the entire model in which you were overseeing your police operations as an organization.
Interesting. And this all is happening while you're in your career. You're seeing law enforcement kind of modernize technology. I bet the technology changed incredible in your time frame in your career, as well as the movement from just a guy with a pistol to, like you talk about, SWAT or Metro. Like it's becomes very intense. Like I remember there's the famous shootout in LA. I don't know if you recall that. It was in the Valley, but like the cops didn't have the right amount of firepower. They had to go to a gun shop to shoot these guys. Maybe you can talk about how policing has changed, modernized, and also militarized.
Yeah, that was what you're speaking of is the North Hollywood shootout.
Yeah, yeah.
It was the bank robbery of a Bank of America by two individuals, and the officers found themselves to be outgunned, and the patrol officers. And really, what was happening is in Metropolitan Division, we had to take a physical fitness standard test quarterly, every 3 months. So, a start of our watch on duty, we would work out for an hour and a half and shower up at the academy. And then, if you're working crime suppression or what have you, whatever your assignment was for that day, then you would proceed on to do that. And SWAT guys were just finishing up their workout, and they showed up in their workout gear and threw on their tack vests and took down the suspects.
Just two songs.
But
What year was that? Do you remember? Gosh, it's like
that
a
would have
famous
been
documentary.
that'd have been 1990. I want to say 1997.
So you were around there, yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I was actually at the time I was either a field training officer or a senior lead officer at Wilshire Division.
But that's in the context of this militarization, right? Because some of these criminals are heavily armed, right? I mean, it's not like I'm saying like pistols. We've moved past that. Like even now they have what they call switches, or I don't even know the terminology these days.
Yeah, back in 1989, Congress passed this measure that allowed the Pentagon temporary authority to provide excess military gear and equipment and weapons to law enforcement throughout the country. And since 1996, I think that's about the time that it went active. There's been about $7 billion with a B dollars worth of gear that has been acquired through that program. And I know about this program because when I was in Metropolitan Division for a few months, I was assigned to it. It's called the Military Acquisition Program. And my partner and I would go to these various military bases in California, and we're basically, our marching orders were go find some good stuff. And that's what it was all about. And really, since about 2011, there's about, on the average, $390 million worth of equipment every year annually that is disseminated to law enforcement agencies. The problem is that there are times, like you speak of that incident, the North Hollywood shootout, that you need this militarized equipment or weaponry and whatnot. The problem is we've allowed it to bleed in to every facet of our policing, and in my estimation, that's kind of served more as a wedge between law enforcement and the communities they serve on a daily basis, having it there. I mean, you just look around. I live in a town of 4,100 people here. I'm in an eastern suburb of Cleveland now, here in Ohio, and the police agency here, they've got these exterior ballistic tack vests. They look like they're in Iraq. Yeah. And there's not much going on in this town. And it's not to say that you shouldn't have that accessible if in the event that you have an active shooter or you have to serve a warrant or that sort of thing. But these concealable body armor vests that I wore throughout my entire 33-year career in law enforcement out in Los Angeles is more than suffice when it comes to the average policing of everyday communities.
Well, isn't that why they have a special weapons and tactics team, is to operate in the instance where somebody has that is overarmed, I guess is a way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, it's more than anything, it's not just the optics of it, the appearance of it, but it really changes the mindset of the police officers. It's I would say, and I've had a conversation with many of my peers that came on at similar time as I did, and are now retired, that we saw ourselves more as guardians when we were hired, not warriors. And I would say that a characteristic of the greatest warrior is empathy and compassion. And you speak softly and you carry a big stick, which means you have the ability, if you need to perform. I've always said police officers aren't paid for what they do on a daily basis. They're paid for what, God forbid, they may have to do. And that requires that you maintain a level of competency in all aspects of policing, whether it's your understanding of the law and what authority you have to do certain things, to your physical fitness conditioning level, to your ability in grappling and pugilistics and firearms marksmanship proficiency, all of that sort of thing. And to be honest, law enforcement doesn't do a very good job of maintaining proficiency levels. Unfortunately, it's about checking the box to say that people have been trained. One thing right now you have, I went into, after Rampart, I went to work for Chief Bratton, and I was involved in the adjudication of all officer-involved shooting and lethal force incidents. And I would brief Chief Bratton on all of those incidents. And I wrote his recommendations for his adjudication findings that were submitted to the Honorable Board of Police Commissioners, who are the final adjudicators of those cases. And then from there, I went over to Force Investigation Division as the officer in charge of the detective entity that investigates all officer-involved shootings and lethal force incidents. So I have a vast understanding of what's going on. I've been involved in over 700 LAPD lethal force cases. I've had my hands involved in one way or another. So the reality is this: about 1/3 of all officer-involved shootings are of people suffering from a mental health crisis. 1/3. And only about 15 to 18% of American law enforcement agencies get any training on de-escalation or the handling of people with mental health crisis. I mean,
It's nothing. It's nothing.
Think about that. So, you're talking about, something that you can take an active, measurable, impactful, a concerted effort to address that type of an issue and reduce the incidents that you're killing people. And we don't do a very good job of it in law enforcement. And
it affects the police too. Like somebody's lost their life, but the cops,
everybody
them as well. Yeah.
Everybody
Family,
lives. And but it's a cultural thing, because like the LAPD, they're certainly at the forefront of de-escalation training and the handling of people with mental illness. They have the mental evaluation unit that responds to these calls. But it's been over a decade that they've had all of this. But guess what? It's still 1/3 of their shootings. It's not working. And it's not because they're not getting trained. It's a cultural thing. It's the training practice gap. And the culture is what creates that. People often say, you also hear this all the time in law enforcement, you play stupid games, you get stupid awards, and that's kind of like a justification of why these things happen. Things happen to people who make bad decisions.
Right. What do you mean by training practice gap? What does that term mean? It means that you're not being trained in these situations. That's what's happening?
Training practice gap is what I would say is you're trained a certain way, but in practice you do something completely different because you are more inclined to do what the culture is driving you to do and what your training is telling you to do. And the problem is you need to make sure that your policy, procedures, and practices are all aligned with the accountability in these circumstances. And you don't see that generally in law enforcement organizations. It's a cultural problem.
There's behavioral psychology too in it, right? Like a lot of this stuff is there's a importance of behavioral psychology in building a better cop, so to speak. I think that's
I talk quite a bit about that in my book On Thin Ice. And what do we need to do to have better outcomes? And I've gone overseas, and I just last November I was over in London with the London Metropolitan Police, and I went over to Paris, France, and I spent some time with the police department there. And it's really interesting that they have a whole different mindset on how they deal with things. And if you look at the Nordic countries, it's not always about necessarily who you hire, but it's how you hire and what you give value to, what is important. And the empirical evidence suggests that the more highly educated you are, the less likely you are to use force, most significantly lethal force, and you're less likely to have complaints. The empirical evidence is study after study after study. So, and I'm not saying that every police officer should have a master's degree. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's nice to have a diversified group of individuals in a law enforcement agency, especially when you're policing communities as diverse as those in Los Angeles. But there has to be some value in education. I mean, listen, the LAPD, I think I got an extra $120 like one time a year for my educational level.
Interesting.
I mean,
it's not valued. It's not valued.
No, it's actually at times I would argue it's a detriment because people are intimidated by by your education.
Your colleagues or the general public? Colleagues.
Colleagues,
Interesting.
colleagues, your your superiors are oftentimes intimidated.
It makes perfect sense because it's problem solving. To do what you got to do to get an advanced degree, be it what, MA or PhD or doctorate, it's just problem solving to get there. So when you're confronted by these difficult situations, I'm sure as a cop, you have options. It's not always.
Well, listen, you look at the United States, and the average amount of training before you hit the streets for a police officer in the United States is approximately 800 hours. Let's put that in the context. To apply for your cosmetology license, you need 1,500 hours of training, nearly twice that of a police officer. And a police officer is carrying a gun and is going to be handling rapidly unfolding tactical scenarios that are very stressful. And that's a level of training that you're going to give them before you put them out in the street to be making these split-second decisions. It's absurd. It really is absurd. Now,
sink or swim too. It's kind of like.
And you look at the Nordic countries. They require 2, 3, 4 years of college education and training.
Interesting.
And during that training, you're not hired until you're done with that training. So what they're doing is they're watching you and evaluating you to see if you possess the characteristics that we would all suggest are important to be successful as a law enforcement officer. Are you a critical thinker? Are you a problem solver? Do you have, empathy, compassion, those types of things, leadership skills? Do you have the interpersonal skills to get along with people? Are you able to de-escalate? All of these sorts of things. But and then they select their people, and the proof's in the pudding. They do surveys there, and law enforcement oftentimes comes out as the top of personnel or government entities that are respected in those countries. Wow, not the case here.
I mean, those are the payments are still. I mean, it's a coveted position here in the States. Like, I mean, do you think that law enforcement is properly paid or salaried here? Like, there's still it's a coveted job, isn't it? Or has it gone up and down in the public's interest?
Well, listen, I would, like the defund the police, most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. We need to fund the police.
Overfund. I think they overfund the police is a smart move. Sorry.
And not only with officer pay and benefits and that sort of thing, and wellness, ensuring that they have the wellness resources available to them. We need to ensure that the money's being spent on their training. Right now we have a deselection process. If you don't have a criminal record, if your finances are in order, and you didn't take too many pencils from your previous job, we'll hire you. I mean, it's a losing scenario, isn't it? It's not a very good.
So you believe almost like the Nordic selection process or some type of internship?
Oh yeah,
or something like that, like a pre-field something before you actually get your ability to become a law enforcement officer. You believe in that?
Yeah, absolutely. I really do believe that the studies show it. That's not really my opinion. I guess it is my opinion, but it's based on empirical evidence, research, data. It's proven. So if that's the case, aren't law enforcement agencies neglectful? I mean, the LAPD, all you need to apply with the LAPD is a GED.
Do you think it's part of like the tough guy image of the cop, that he's real brawny and strong, and maybe they're not valuing, academics or kind of interpersonal empathy, EQ skills or something like that? Do you think that may be kind of like the cultural view of cops is inhibiting these types of reforms or better selection processes?
It's a lot of it's self-imposed in the culture of law enforcement. I was an elite athlete. I played Division I college ice hockey, and if not for some serious injuries, I would have had a fairly formidable professional career. And throughout my law enforcement career, I maintained a physical fitness standard that exceeded the vast majority of my peers. And that's a language that law enforcement speaks. But you also need to be able to speak the language of, emotional intelligence and compassion and empathy and problem solving and critical thinking and all of those sorts of things. And they're not valued. Um, I've always been one. I was raised in a family, as I spoke early on in our interview here today, that I came up in a family that was very different than others. So I got used to being treated differently. So it never really bothered me when people didn't accept my views. I was like, whatever, that's fine. But it didn't intimidate me to conform. But there is an aspect of the culture in law enforcement for people to conform to the status quo of this is how we do it, this is how we've always done it, and this is how we're going to continue to do it.
Right. It's like a malaise that gets corporations too. It's not just in law enforcement. It's just the way I used to have a friend of mine who was a business consultant, and these people they were just used to doing it their way, and that was it. And they don't need to reform or upgrade their skills or do anything like that. So maybe it's like a systemic thing where you put these incentives in these places so people do go to night school, get re-educated, get more training or something like that.
Right. It's important because, when I went through the academy with the LA County Sheriff's Department, I graduated as the honor recruit. I had the highest academic score. I had a 98.7% average. And I was number one in the physical conditioning scores, number two in firearms proficiency. And I was selected by my peers and my training staff to be the honor recruit, which is the number one recruit in the class. And we graduated 107. We started with 157, 50 washed out. But, the reality is that, I took a lot of grief for that. I would study quite a bit because my goal was to get 100%. And my peers would be like, what are you studying so much for? All you need is a 70 to pass. Like mediocrity is good enough. And that just never, it just didn't resonate with me, that kind of mentality. I was always raised and my parents always told me, no matter what endeavor you take on, you do the best you possibly can at it, period. And that was just so ingrained in me. And that is what I did through my hockey career. And that's what I carried into my law enforcement career and what I'm doing now and writing my book and as a founder and CEO of Law Enforcement Consultants. And that's just part of who I am.
Do you think that there's a significant differences in culture and policing in different jurisdictions? Do you think they all kind of operate the same, or do you think that there's a wide spectrum between different municipalities or cities?
It's different. I would say there's there's similarities based to size of organizations. Some of the challenges are similar. The vast majority of law enforcement agencies, 70% of law enforcement agencies in the United States police a population of 10,000 or less. So they're oftentimes resource starved. They have to try to navigate things. They don't have the resources that we had with the LAPD. And so their experience is very different. I have a friend of mine, he was with LAPD and he lateraled down to Irvine PD and he became the chief of police there. And he's retired now. And I just spoke to him a week ago. And it was interesting talking to him about his experiences. And they're very vastly different. So no, my experiences with the LAPD, I can't say that I can, say that those are exactly what you would experience in every police organization within the United States. But there are some very, very similar obstacles and challenges that we do have, based primarily just because of the nature of the job and the challenges of the sociological issues that we're facing in modern day policing today.
Right. And you have a full section in the last section. Your book is broken into 3 sections. The last section is how we reimagine law enforcement, the path forward. So people check that out. We are at the 55-minute mark, Jeff. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed before we wrap it up?
Yeah, listen, I mean, we could go on for hours. I mean, it's 33 years in my law enforcement career. There's so much we could talk about. there's so much that is yet to be done for me moving forward. My career was just the beginning of the influence that I can have on improving policing throughout the country. But if you want to learn more about me, you can go to jeffwenninger.com, or you can go to my website of my company, which is lawenforcementconsultants.com, or you can go to the book website, which is onthinicebook.com.
Right. I have that right here. Let me see if I can pull that up. I can show it. And people can, if they have any additional questions or want to reach out to you, the best place is your website, right? This is it.
Well, no, listen, you can go to LinkedIn, Jeff Wenninger on LinkedIn or Facebook. You send me a message, I will absolutely respond.
All right, cool. I will put links to your LinkedIn profile, Facebook, and your website, which is jeffwenninger.com. You can check out the book there. Do you have, it's in paperback, Kindle right now, right? I was trying to.
It actually hasn't been released just yet. The marketing team is it's going to be late summer, early fall. There's a whole strategy to that, but the book is done. But it's going to be in hardback, paperback. It'll be on Kindle, and I'm also going to be reading it. You'll be able to get the audio. So
sweet. So you're going to be the celebrity reading your own book. That's cool.
Yep.
Yeah. So check it out when it comes out. It's my understanding that it was already released, but sometimes things fall through.
It's ready to be released, but it's all marketing strategy. So.
It's a great book. I enjoyed reading through it. A lot of stuff personal. I could personalize being from California and knowing the kind of locale and some of the stories. So great job. Again, the author's name is Jeff Wenninger. Last name is spelled Wenninger. And the full title of his book, which should be released soon, is On Thin Ice, an LAPD veteran's journey to reimagine policing. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, stay there. I have to have